Welcome, everybody. Today is the 6th session of the MCD 1 exam prep. And, we were looking over the list of objectives, and I think that we might have a 7th session just to make sure that we're covering everything. Because one thing I found yesterday when I was pulling up some information for a client is that the current exam is based on the spring 24 release. So that's last year's release of the material. So I need to go back and look at exactly what that material is. I do think that they cover API governance. So I'm going to do a little segment on API governance right now for you, because that way you're at least familiar with it. If you're not familiar at all with it, you're going to get a little preview of it right now. So let's jump into API governance. Now, when we're creating our specifications, we're writing our code, and, our developers, are probably following a template, perhaps, or writing their code for the first time. Either way, it doesn't matter. But, sometimes we overlook things. And as either architect or lead developer on a team, you want to know that whatever is being published to Exchange and going forward in the life cycle of an API is following certain standards. So how do we do that? I remember several times in my IT career, we would have, the compliance checks every year, and they would go through and say, okay, so what do you have in place to check your code to make sure it's up to standards? And, what are you doing for securing your different assets and all kind of different things. There's many different, even the computers had to be encrypted. And there's all kind of stuff, that they will check for on the compliance ratings. And so this is a wonderful addition to Anypoint Platform to cover that for us, because what it does, so let's say a developer is going through and creating the specification, that's great. But what happens is, hold on a minute. What happens is, we need a way to come in and provide a means of checking that code. So there's a feature that is in Anypoint Platform called API governance. Now you're going to come into an existing profile, because this one does have a profile already associated with it. But it's good because you're going to see the dashboard. So I'm going to go to API governance here. And this is a profile that I created. But what you might see in your account when you go there is this new profile opportunity. So I just clicked on the icon that says new profile. And so this is an API governance profile. And what that means is, when you come in here and you start selecting some of these rule sets. Now, what are these rule sets? What are here? These rule sets will check a specification based on whatever kind of API or asset that it is. It might be an async API. It may be a OAS API. It may be a RAML API. So, or specification. So we don't really know exactly, or I should say there are rule sets available for different types of these APIs. Even data graph best practices, HTTPS enforcement. And then we've got authentication security best practices. So what are these? What are we talking about here? So if I go ahead, you can click on these and view an exchange. And when I go to, for example, this one is a really good one, and I wanted to point it out. There's some minimal ones like required examples. Like you have to have an example in your specification for every different element that you have there. Whereas, Anypoint best practices, async best practices API, etc. So there are, many things here. But the OWASP is one I like to point out, because OWASP is an organization that does research every year, and they produce this top 10 vulnerability list. And so let me go to the homepage here. So you can go to the OWASP API homepage, and you can see that, they will do, scans and list out the top vulnerabilities and how, what you can do to prevent your assets from having these vulnerabilities. Everything from, having, oh goodness, broken function level authorization, unrestricted access to sensitive business flows. Like, in other words, something that does not have a, client ID, client secret, perhaps. Server-side request forgery, security misconfiguration. Like, if you happen to have some kind of a configuration that's not real sound, that's not real strong, so this is, they will give the top 10 vulnerability. Here's the top 10 for 2023. Now, it doesn't get printed out very often. Notice that the last one was 2019. And I believe that's the one that we're using here, 2019. So I project that they will update. I project that MuleSoft will update theirs to 2023. But we can look at the top 10 2023 vulnerabilities and then know that your code is being tested against these latest vulnerabilities. And what does that mean? Basically, when I choose to add this rule set, so this is a particular type of asset in Exchange, there's a special group of rule sets, it's going to check the code. So for example, for a violation of the broken object level authorization, we can click on this and you can see applies to a parameter. You can in turn, notice exactly what that parameter should be, how it should be defined, and various details there. So essentially, this is going to be a way to check our code when there is, when you want to have certain things identified, and you want to be able, when they're doing this compliance check, you want to be able to say, yes, our specifications are covered by different rule sets. For example, we have the OWASP top 10 list there. We also have, Anypoint practice, or API management best practices, or whatever it is, whatever you want to apply. So where we use this, and we can continue to create a rule set here. So I would want to pick one. I'm going to go ahead and click on just required examples for right now. And then the next step is what kind of asset is this going to be? What kind of API? We'll go with the REST API. You could tag your APIs. Remember, I've tagged one of them somewhere along the line as a system API. So I could choose this to apply to all system APIs or categorize them certain ways, and then come down to the list of APIs and choose which ones I want it to cover. Okay, automatically cover. Now this is a trial account, so it's going to tell me I've reached a limit here. So I won't be able to go forward to do this. However, you can choose the various APIs. Let me see if I could just grab one here. Where's the American? There we go. Yeah, it's not going to let me choose anything. So anyway, as you go forward, you can identify who will be alerted when there's a problem, and then you name it. So this is going to be the 2025 SAPI profile, because this is just a profile. This is really, giving you the opportunity to create this. I don't know if it's going to let me, but we'll see. This is the review of it. Yeah, it's telling me nope. And I'm going to save it as a draft for right now. Okay, so now this is my other dashboard, and this dashboard is showing me which APIs are not compliant at this time. And so I can go into, one of these, let's see, and I can see which APIs are not conformant is the proper word, actually, conformant. Now this tag will actually show in Exchange. So when we are in Exchange and I go to that given API, there is the not validated here. Okay, the not validated, because that particular or a rule set has not been applied to this API. Actually, I'm on the wrong API, but mine had been applied. It's here somewhere. There it is. Okay, so mine had been applied. See, the first one I showed you that was RJ's did not have a rule set on it, so it was grayed out. Mine has a rule set on it, and it's not conformant. And look where it's saying, when I mouse over that, it's showing me where it's not conformant. Now, this one was published to Exchange before the rule set was added to it. Okay, so it got into Exchange not conformant, kind of not a good thing. But what we can see is if how we apply these, sometimes they get automatically applied when you have it tagged like we had it tagged. But otherwise, in Design Center, it should automatically apply. And I don't think it's going to, but we're going to look at it and I'll show you where you can apply it. In the left-hand panel in Design Center, we can come down here. Yeah, here it is. There's 0 rule sets added at this time. So I'm going to add the rule set to it. This is another way you can add the rule set and be able to choose based on the ones that are in that we see here. I'm going to go ahead and say add all rule sets here. So it's taking all of these rule sets and it's going to check my code. Okay. And once it applies them, there's going to be errors in the code. Notice that there's errors now. See the yellow on the right? Okay. And if we click on the project errors, bottom right area, click on the project errors, we can see there's no syntax problem with the code at all because it was okay before. But yet in the governance category, it's going to list those problems and it will not allow us to publish to Exchange since there are issues in the root file here, since it's not compliant. Okay. So this is a way that you can make sure code is managed and keeping up to a certain standard. So this is API governance, and I know we're using it. I know that we're using it in some of the courses, so I wanted to be sure that you're familiar with it. Now, again, you cannot publish it to Exchange if it's not compliant. And if we go to Exchange and we go to the main part of Exchange, we can look at the asset types here and go to the rule sets. And this is the list of rule sets provided by MuleSoft that are available out of the box. These are the same ones that we saw when we were creating the governance profile. So you don't have to have a governance profile created to add a rule set to an API, but this gives you a central location to see what's going on, what's not. I get alerts on these. I get an email that tells me it's not compliant. I probably will have an email in my inbox telling me American Flights is not compliant because I just added those. But these rule sets are kind of a standard out of the box product ready for you to use. And if there is something unique, like for example, in healthcare, there is also HIPAA compliance regulations. So I might want to create a customized rule set for HIPAA compliance. I might want to create, if there's something unique in your industry that you want to make sure that your coding is up to par in a certain area, then you can create your own customized rule set. So that's just very similar to API policies. We can create a custom policy. Likewise, you can create a custom rule set. Okay, any questions on this so far? All right.
Good day.
All right. So what we would have to do in this case where we've added these rule sets is to come in here and go line by line and see what the vulnerability is, how we would need to change that and make sure that it's compliant. Okay. So over here, these are the 3 that were applied to this. I don't know that we would always have 3, maybe, it just depends on the use case and the need. So, but this one would not, the developer, as they're working on the specification, if the rule set is, automatically applied, they would not be able to move forward from this point until they had, fixed all of this. So there you have it. That's API governance. And again, you'll have a dashboard. You can, check and see that it's failed, view the full, there's reports that you can have here also. that give you more details, view details of that report, the violations. So you can really see, like what is actually wrong with it and what needs to be done. It'll tell you some, additional ways to fix it. But if you have that, I don't think I have one out here in Exchange that has the, that is compliant. But it would be a greened up button, not there, that shows that it is compliant. I don't think I have one. I should have one out there that does show that. Yeah, not conformant. So it'd be greened up. There's a green button that says conformant or something like that. I always say compliant. You know why I say compliant? Because that's what I've always used in the industry, is if something is not compliant, then you put together what we call a remediation solution. And so the remediation list has to be processed, which means basically if I were managing that, I would in turn be talking to the developers. Here's how you have to fix the code. Do this. That's a remediation plan. And then the scan gets ran again. And these type of scans can be ran also even on your Mule apps, not this one, but there are other products out there in, third-party products that can check your Mule XML code as well. So it kind of hits it at a couple of different levels. All right. So that is it on the topic for the API governance. And our topic today is going to be on routing. Okay, routing. Now, we did talk about message validation a teensy bit. We will go over that also today. But we're going to go over each of the routers. Now, really in the fundamental course and exam relevant are going to primarily be the choice router and the scatter gather router. So be very familiar with both of those. Okay. And I want you to remember this, and I'll go over it when we're actually looking at the routers, is that every time a request comes in, you're going to have a unique value for your payload and variables. Okay. So as it goes through the route, when it completes, that is where it's going to have the payload variables, for that particular request. Some of them that you're going to see also, we're going to do the round robin and we're going to do the first successful as well. So I want you to be aware of these other ones too and their ability. And I'll go over some details on, I'm trying to figure a way to word this because I know one of the exam questions has something very tricky about it. And students come out of the exam going, what were they talking about there? And I'll go over it because they actually have a flow reference in a choice router that goes back to initiating the flow again, but it's a flow reference. So that means it's not a new request. I'll show you. All right. So anyway, in the, that's the one I was telling you about. I was trying to remember what it was, and that's kind of the gist of it. And we'll go over it a little bit. So, then the validation module is in our Mule palette. And so we'll take a look at that. And then routing possibilities and things that you can do at runtime. And that's where choice router, scatter gather, you can embed them. You can have, a router in a router, or a router that calls another router. So we'll go over some of those details. All right. So the four that we have to use are the choice router, the scatter gather router, first successful router, and round robin. Okay. So choice, we're going to go into some details here. You have different routes and there's a default route here. Okay. So the default route, if none of these match the criteria for these given routes, and we only show one processor in each of the pathways here in each of the routes, but you can have multiple processors here. You could actually do some logic in the choice router if you wanted to. Generally speaking, though, we do a flow reference to another flow, and that means basically that allows us to manage you know, the logic elsewhere. Kind of a good thing to do. Then if none of the criteria are matching, then we'll go down to the default and this will automatically run. So whatever you do here is going to be, you know, either to mop up, hey, you didn't send in the correct values to hit a route, or you might want to go give them all. Like in our case, we flow reference, and in the fundamental class, we do this also. We flow reference over to the all of the airlines, and in our case, we do that, and we are going to pull all of the excursions. This example is going to be based on different excursions for travel. So then we have the scatter gather. We're going to talk about that a little more in detail, and all of these routes run. So this is a, you know, parallel processing here where every one of the flows run. We have route 0, route 1, and route 2. And likewise, even in the choice router, it's going to be called 0, 1, and 2. And then there's a special thing that happens in the scatter gather because you do have 3 separate payloads. And in our case, we want just one payload. If you did not do any kind of transformation here on your 3 separate payloads and you tried to send that back to your HTTP listener, you would get an error. So this combines those 3 payloads into one. Okay. And then the first successful, this one's a really cool one, and I'll give you some, you know, more details on it when we cover it and run it. But this will run the first route that runs successfully. If this first 0 path or 0 route here ran successfully, that's all it would do. But if there was an error here, it would not flag it as an error. It would just roll down to the next route and the next route. Okay, if there's errors. So it will run the first successful. If this route 1 here is successful, then it's done. Okay, but if there was an error here, it would roll to the next one. So that's first successful. And then round robin is kind of interesting. People end up walking away thinking it's kind of like a mule router. Okay, because what it does is it will, or kind of like a load balancer is what I meant. It will run route 0 first, route 1. Oh, I should say the first request that comes in is going to route through route 0. Okay, and finishes. The next request will come in. It's going to go to route 1 and finishes. Another request comes in, it goes to route 2, and likewise. A 4th request comes in and goes back to route 0. So it will consecutively, you know, go through route 0, route 1, you know, for each request. Each request is how it behaves. So let's take a look now. We're going to dive a little deeper on each of these. I call these the when clause because it is a when, you know, like when something occurs. And in this case, we're using an expression, and we're saying if the excursion category is equal to ADV for adventures, then you're going to run this route here, and it'll flow reference over to the adventures. And then in the private flows that we have, we've got a read URL. We're reading off of a CSV file that has a list of adventures. Okay. So in that list, then we just return back in the case of having a match, we return back just the adventures. Okay. And the other routes are not executed. So only where it has a match. Okay. When there's no match, in our case, we're saying, okay, then go run the scatter gather flow and get all of them. If they don't tell us, or if they've misspelled something, then we're just going to give them all of it. Okay. But the default, if there's no match, the default is always running, will always run. Now, the one I was talking about that you want to watch for on the exam is that this, if I recall correctly, and if it's still on the exam, don't know, it flow references back to your listener. Okay. So what it does at that point is it's got some additional logic here. I don't remember all of what it is. I couldn't tell you if I remembered it. I can't tell you exactly the details, but let me tell you that watch for a flow reference that references your choice flow. And if that's the case, anything that's been set in your payload or your variables or anything that's been set here are still available. They're still available. So if you have a payload or a variable, and then it comes in here and it goes to another route because of the variable is a match, then that will complete the process and finish, and it does finish that time. But there is, if I recall right, a flow reference here. Remember that. Now, if that flow reference is not there and it does normally run as it should, then of course your variables and your payload are going to be unique every time this runs, right? But remember the behavior of a flow reference here that does keep your values that you set inside your variables because it's flow referencing back here. Are you both clear on that?
Yeah, that's making sense to me since it's going to still be within that same request. It's going to carry, it wouldn't have gotten rid of the variables. I'm envisioning that, like seeing it running through right now.
Yep. And even the set payload. If it's a set payload or a variable, it's still, those values are still there. Okay.
That makes sense since you're still on that same request. It just flow referenced it back through.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Good, good. Manny, you clear?
Yes, Dan, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Okay, so wanted to point that out. That was that mystery one. I knew I get a lot of questions when I coach students to, you know, they're like, oh my gosh, there was this one. And so that's it. That's the one. You got to watch. I did not write questions like that on the exam. Actually, I didn't write I was not part of the team that wrote the MCD one. I was part of the team that wrote MCD2 and associate and the platform architect, but not this one. I wouldn't have written one that was tricky. I'm pretty straightforward. So anyway, okay, so that's the choice router. So let's get Studio up and running. And I think that I already did, one second. I think that I already did share with you the router jar file yesterday, the other day, correct?
Yes, I have that. I've been looking at your jar files here.
Okay, Manny, you have the router?
Yes, Dan.
Okay. And what I need to do is I need to get all these into GitHub. For anyone that's watching the video that had not received it from me, I'm going to get all of these assets into GitHub. That's a project that needs to be done. So, okay. So in the router application that we have, remember that we have in the source main resources, all of these CSV files. Okay, so we have an EX for excursion adventures. If you click that open, you will see that it is a CSV file. So pretty simple, just a way to show, well, a way to show how you can read in a CSV file, but at the same time, it's just part of a package to share how this works. So we have the adventures, excursion, or adventures, cuisine, and guided tours. And based on, if we scroll down to the bottom down here, you can see each of the private flows. And if you look at the transform message, you can see that we're reading in that CSV file. And when this runs, it's going to give the payload back based in JSON of those adventures. Okay, and each one, adventures, cuisine, and the guided tours. So as we come back up here, our request, there's our path, but we also need to pass in a query parameter. Now we don't use the option in these. I was doing something with that. I honestly don't know what I was planning on for that, but we're not using that one. So when that one is, it's going to have an opt out. So don't worry about that one. The set variable is for the excursion category. We have the message attributes query parameters, and our EX category is the key name. Okay, so our key name is this, meaning that if we're going to include a query parameter, we need to have this added. I don't know why it's given an underline on that, but at any rate, so once this is running, go ahead and get Advanced REST Client up. And we'll go ahead and get our pathway completed. So again, the path is choice. I'll put the entire thing in the chat for you. And we'll run through each of these. There you go. Okay, so the in our value for our query parameter, one thing we did do here, notice this value of our query parameter has the upper function being invoked for it. So that means if somebody just did a capital A, a lowercase d, and a lowercase v, or any combination of upper lowercase, when it hits that, or if they just do all lowercase, maybe they don't realize, it's going to upper all of those so that when we hit the when clause here, we will have a match. Okay. So however you want to set this up, if you wanted it all lower, you could use the lower function, however you want to do that. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and run this and send in our requests. And we should get back just the adventures. Okay. And you can run it in debug mode. I encourage you all to do that, as you know, but I'm kind of keeping an eye on our time too. So you want to run it in debug mode and you can actually see it will hit this one. It will flow reference down to the adventure private flow and, you know, go through that process. Likewise, the next one, we'll go ahead and do the CEX. Okay. That's the cuisine one, CEX. And we get the cuisine. So depending on what value you place, depending on what your when clause is, will determine these routes. And if we don't have anything at all, it's just a regular request of choice, then we are going to get all of the excursions. Okay. And essentially, it will run the scatter gather, which is our next one. Okay, so looking at the scatter gather, all of these routes are executed in parallel. We'll see there will be 3 payloads. And those 3 payloads are going to be flattened into one. Okay, so let's run those. It just ran, by the way, because we did the all. And if you look at the console, we will see, because let me bring this back down. In our private flows down here, we're logging each of the payloads. Okay, and I do that. You remember I told you I'm heavy on logging because well, that's all we had. But I want, after each one, we should see a log of just the adventures, just the cuisine, and just the guided tours. And then when we run the scatter gather, it'll flatten the 3 into one payload. So you will see that reflected here in our logs. Okay, you'll see the individual ones. Let's go ahead and just run it one more time for just the scatter gather. So this would be, again, as they're labeled, scatter gather. And send it in, and we're getting all of them. But if we take a look at what just happened in the console, we go all the way to the bottom. First of all, the entire payload is flattened together. We'll see that one. That's the entire payload there. And then come up and you're going to see each of the adventures. This one, I'm sorry, this is the adventure payload. This is the cuisine, or no, guided tour payload. And this is the cuisine payload. So we have 3 separate payloads. Okay, 3 separate payloads. And each one then is flattened into one. Okay. All right, so that is a scatter gather. all together as one. Then the next one is going to be the round robin. And sorry, the way the round robin will work is, like I said, is a request comes in, it'll route to 0, completes back, is done. Second request comes in, 1. Okay, and it'll completely go through the 0, 1, 2, 0 for the request. So let's get Studio over here. And we'll take a look at the round robin and send in this request. We'll just change this to round robin. And the first request is the adventures only. The second request, cuisine only. Third request, guided tours. Send another, back to adventure. So it has to be a new request each time for it to advance to the next route. Now, if the application stops and restarts or redeploys, you're going to go back to route 0. Okay. So it is, in some ways, a use case would be for managing, maybe you've got sales representatives and you want to manage your different, promotions, and you want to send out a file, or you want to send some information to each of those sales representatives and kind of balance it out between, different sales reps. Or if you have staff and you want to deliver work to them based on, just managing it and then having it where you have the ability to share something in a pattern like this that shows it kind of divides it out, So, have I ever used it professionally? No, I have not. But, I can see some use cases. I kind of think of it as like a Mule internal load balancer in a way. But, if you wanted to have different specials that you are offering, for some of your clients that were interacting, you could throw off different possibilities, through a round robin. So anyway, food for thought. And the final one is our first successful. Now, this one, it sounds really good. And as a developer, I'm sure that it would, there are great benefits for it. But really, as an architect, this is your friend. This is a way in which, if there is an error that occurs on one of the routes, it's going to not throw an error like we've seen in error handling, but it's going to roll down to the next route. Okay. And as long as it hits a route that's successful, it's going to be processing without any problems. However, if all 3 routes fail, you'll get an error. Okay. So let's take a look at this one. And like I said, this one is great architecturally. And so to say that would be that, let's say that route 0 is our primary database and it's down. So, and I shared this a little bit the end of day on Tuesday, is that then you have so route 0 is down. This route, we want to go ahead and have a secondary database, or even a static document that has, maybe it captured each night the current status of, all of the billing or all of the patient data or whatever the case may be. And so route 1 is going to return back some kind of data, at least something. Okay. So this is really helpful as far as that's concerned. Let's run this. So this is going to be first successful. Okay. And now in our case, we have an error occurring in the adventures. So we should get back the cuisine. Okay. So let's send this in. And yeah, it's going right past it. And in the console, Let me get the console all the way down. Notice it doesn't even say anything about an error. See it? We don't have an error being thrown at all. And an error did occur. So it just rolls right down to that next one. It's kind of like a safety net. All right. So that is the routers. Okay. Now in the category of, and that concludes the fourth router. So that kind of completes there. Now, what I did want to also show you, we covered this a little bit in the validation, but let's go ahead, stop our project from running here. And let me see. I'll go over some of the details here. In our add modules category of our palette, come to the add modules, and you'll see this validation module. Just slide that over into your jar file and say, yes, add it. And so what this is allowing us to do is to, and this is a big part, actually, it usually comes in under error handling. So when we do a segment, you know, not exam relevant, but for the team on error handling strategies, this is going to be a big part of it. Because what we want to do, like, is to check on values. Like if we have a request going into our database and we're requesting, you know, for a particular patient number, and there is not a payload that comes back there. In other words, that patient ID is not valid. And so what happens when we do that and we do a select statement on a database, that it won't throw an error. It just returns back an empty payload. So we will want to use our validations to see if that is, you could do the is true payload empty. Okay, so there's different ways you can use the validators. Sometimes it gets a little confusing because it can be almost like two negatives, you know, not is null and those kind of things. But anyway, we're going to do this in our error handling strategy. And what this does is it allows us to check on, you know, if it's an email, if it's a URL, if it's, you know, if it's empty, if it's is true or is false and that type of thing. You could even do regex, you know, and regex allows us to check on particular patterns. Those patterns would be based on different values. If you're not familiar with what regex is, let me capture this really quick. Okay, so this is tells you a little bit about regex here. I'll put this in the chat. And this is used oftentimes to check patterns in your data. We also use it in the robotic process automation for a bot to locate some information. Okay. And essentially what it means and what it does is you would have a expression, Jack's flavor guide. Okay. No, that's not one of this one. Is a expression that you would test against your code. So more on that. We can do some details on this. You do not have to memorize this or know this for the exam, but what you do need to understand is that, you know, regex can test your code. As you can see an example here, this would be the expression for checking to see values. See if this is going to give us what we want. So this will match either a B, or C character. Some of them get very detailed. Like let me do regex for an email. Okay, so here is this an email? Yeah, here's a pattern to check for an email. Okay, so you could say, I'm going to put this in the chat. You could say this regex expression this is the pattern. And so if you have a match of that pattern, then you have a valid email address. If you don't, then you don't. So that's where in Studio where we're seeing regex, and you'll see regex also in the, like I said, robotic process automation, we use it to locate values. It will come back with matches. Okay. So it's just one of the options there under the validator. And then you can also set up scopes of the validator. So you could do all and have everything in here must match, like an is true, is number, maybe, you know, whatever we want to set here. You can have those values, you can have those patterns. You can have, you know, there's a regex pattern down there, you know, so you could check in great detail. You can have it be any, you know, and any scope, you know, so it would be like any one of them have to be true. Not all, but any one. So whatever you're setting up in your validation, this is a way, it's really, to me, it's very applicable more for error handling to make sure your data that you are expecting to come in is clean data. Okay. Or for the example I gave, that we do a search on the database for a particular patient and the ID is not, you know, not a valid ID of a patient in our database. And so what the database does is it just returns an empty object, you know, to a blank curly bracket. And so if we move forward and try to use data that we expected in that payload, we're going to get an error somewhere down the line. Because then we start to say, okay, first name is this, and we're going to use it for billing, and it's blowing up because there's no data there. So the validators are great for that. You know, it'll help you to say, okay, and then you would manage that through an error handler and saying that, oh, sorry, that patient does not exist in our database. You know, so you would manage that. Right. All right. One other thing that I do think that we need to cover that's not been covered so far, it just kind of hit me, is semantic versioning. Okay, semantic versioning is on the exam. There's no question. And so essentially what that means is, let me find it here. Okay, so from the very beginning when we start designing our APIs, let's see where I have mine. We'll go here. When we start designing our APIs, it starts off where we start building our design, we start working with this, and then we're ready to publish it to Exchange. So from the very beginning, and mine's going to say no because those rule sets are going to be applied here in just a minute. But if I publish this to Exchange, or try to, the first value that you're going to see the very first time you start to publish it to Exchange is going to be 1.0.0. Okay, and it'll be V1 here. So this is based on semantic versioning for the versioning of our APIs. And from day one, it will be reflected in Exchange based on our versioning here. Okay. And so these versions are tracked. You can also manage your versions and see the life cycle of, you know, the different versionings of our API here. So the current version on this one is 1.0.4. Okay. Now, when we go to change the major version, I've got one here that is a major version. Maybe it was my American flag. Okay. When you go to change and publish to Exchange and you decide to change the major version, that will make it have a separate asset associated with it. And it's a major version change. So you can see here under our managed versions, I'm on the version 2. Okay, if I do the drop down, I can see the 1. If I want to navigate back to the version 1, I can. If I want to, you know, continue moving forward with a new version that's not real, maybe it's not really ready yet. maybe I'm still working on the details of it. So I don't even want it public. Notice the private is set to the version 2 is set to private, but the public version is in use here. Okay, so this is going to be made, when we have a major version change, is going to impact the functionality of our API. So let's look at the semantic versioning breakdown. This is a good website here also to remember. Coming in the chat for you is the semantic versioning page. So each of the positions of these numbers have meaning. Okay. So we have we'll start at the front part. We'll start at the major version. Okay. So the major version, just like you saw in that API, is now a 2 dot something. And that means if you were currently using the 1.1.0 version of that API, and now you see there's a new version, which is a 2.0.0, that means that the changes are not backwards compatible. What you are currently using here, and your Mule app is using that as its interface, would not work with the new version. The changes are not backward compatible. So they would have to get the new version, see how it works, work behind the scenes until they're ready to actually use it. Okay, so it is not backwards compatible. Now, if they're currently using the 1.1.0 and there is a minor version change, meaning that this time the changes are so minimal that what you're currently using here will still work. So everything you currently are using is going to be fine. However, they may have added like a new endpoint or a new feature, maybe a new health check to the API, just something additional to that API. But what you're currently using is good, is backwards compatible, but now we're going to be adding us new features. So the semantic version number would impact the second position here. Okay, it would impact that second location. And so what that means is now it would be a 1.2.0 version. So they're currently using the 1.1.0. They see that this is now a 2. So what I would do in that case is go see what changed. Maybe I want to fix my Mule application and use the new endpoint, but I would have to update my Mule application in order to do that. Okay. So it would all be part of managing the, changes, but it is backwards compatible. All right. And then the patch version, that's this guy right here. If we're using a 1.1.0 currently, and then we see a new version number of a 1.1.1, then we know, oh, it's just some kind of minor fix. They may have had a documentation. They may have modified it in some way or fixed a bug or something like that. And you can easily and actually should go ahead and use the new version. Test it first by all means, but go ahead and use the new version because it's kind of a fix or documentation or something. Okay. So that's the semantic versioning number sequence. Now, what is important for exam relevance is knowing a scenario that can occur that would have an impact on the semantic version numbers. And so your questions are going to come about more in the category of what would the new semantic version be? So for example, if I'm running 1.1.9, okay, and I fix a bug. There was a bug. sorry. What is the next semantic version number going to be?
One point 1.10.
Correct. Yep. Yep. And this can go high. I've seen them. We had one at the state. We just got to laughing because it was really high. Well, there it goes again, another number. But at any rate, yes. This can be a long number. So yes, it would change there. What if we added a new endpoint? What would it be then?
When I think endpoint, that means it's still backwards compatible, but you just added like some functionality that people don't have to use. So that would be the minor. So it would be 1.2.10. Is that correct?
Good guess. Manny, what do you think?
I think we are updating some functionality here. Maybe it will be like the next future. So we will update the things like to the next version.
Okay, what do you think the number should be?
So maybe 1.2.0 maybe. Yeah, the next version.
Like so? Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. And great answers on both of them. Know that it actually does go to the next whole number. It does drop this. And a lot of people get that wrong on the exam. Okay. So do know that it will bump it to the next number. For example, what if we wanted to do a major version number? Now it's not backwards compatible. And let's say we were running a 2.9.13 and you're going to the next major version. What will it be?
So now that I'm seeing that, it makes sense now. So it would be 3.0.0. And I need to commit that to memory that when you make a minor change, you're going to reset the 0 at the patch.
Correct. Yes. And that's why I thought we better go over that because I don't think we had talked about this yet. So yes, you're right. And it does, you can be at 99 here. And if it's a patch version, if it's, just a bug fix, it's going to go to a 1.1.100, right? So if it's in its category, it can go as high as we want. It could be a 1.99.0 and go to 1.100 if it's within that same category, .0. But if it jumps the next level up, it will trigger them all to be reset to 0. Yeah. Okay. So good. I don't want you getting something as simple as that wrong on the exam, because that's, and the other part of this is not only the number sequencing like you're seeing here, but the other part is what kind of scenario will trigger the different levels. Okay. So, okay, let me do this. Let's say you have a field that's not required in your specification and you change it to a required field. Which category is it going to fall in?
If it's now required to operate normally, then it's a major.
Right. Manny, agree?
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. You're right. Because if it is backwards compatible, like if you had a required field and they changed it to not required, that's backwards compatible. So it would fall under the minor, right? But if it goes the other way and you make something that is now required, you'll break it. Just think of anything that would break it. If it's going to break it, it's going to be major. You major, change that. If it's something that, allows what you currently had to continue working, then it's going to be a minor. I think there's one question, I think it's in the practice exam though, but it is, you had a date time and you are changing it to a date time with a time zone. Okay. And so you're adding an additional required value. And the question is, what kind of category would it fall under? What do you think? So you had
I
date
think
time.
adding some new thing, right? To the existing functionality.
Yeah, it would break the functionality. If you didn't have the time zone, it would break it, right?
If it's breaking it, then
Yes.
it has to be major, huh?
Correct. Correct. So that's how some of your questions are going to be. They're going to be, and it may be one or two. I don't know how many it is, but it's going to be something like that, So be aware of semantic versioning. Now, this is not a question on the exam, but it's more relevant to the real world. And that is that the semantic versioning, when we publish to Exchange anything new, it's not going to automatically update to the correct version number based on what we did. It's not going to know, oh, you just made something required. It's not going to know that. It's just going to automatically go to the next number of the patch. Okay. Of the patch version. It's going to automatically increment the patch. So if you have made major changes, and we do have to go to a V3, then you manage that as the developer to reflect the, exactly what it should be. Okay, so you would manage that here. All right, so if I just did a fix, I'm going to go here. If I just did, if I added a new field or a new endpoint, oops, I would add here. Okay, so FYI. All right, good, guys. All right, so I have a list of the things that I'm going to probably do in number 7, and I've got to be out of town next week, so I'm probably going to do some of this in a video, because if you're ready to be in your final stages of prepping for the exam, please do that. Don't hold up on me. I will try to get to these additional, and the additional one, number 1, I want to check to see what the curriculum was as of spring 24, which was really last year. I'll make sure there's no objectives that have been overlooked. I think it should be in the objective list anyway that we have and we saw, right? That was part of the, I don't have it open anymore. I think I closed that window. Yeah. Oh no, here it is. Okay. So I would think that it would be reflected here if they added anything. And I do see, like I mentioned, is MUnit. So I need to do a segment on MUnit. But what I do want you to think about is to go ahead and set the date of your exam. Go ahead and pick a date, get out there, schedule your exam. Okay. Then you want to be thinking about where you're going to take the exam. It does need to be in a quiet area. You cannot talk to anyone. You can, if there's a window beside you or behind you, they're going to, when you first get logged in for the day of the exam, they're going to have you check your space. They're going to have you move your camera around. They're going to have you check, maybe even check under your desk, so be prepared that they're going to have you check the area. Okay. And so you're going to, you can use your laptop camera. It used to be in the past that you couldn't, but know that you can use your laptop camera. Make sure that, your internet's strong. You can't stream anywhere. Make sure they're going to basically have everything on your system shut down. If you have, they'll come in and ask if may I have permission to check your services on your laptop? And so you'll say yes, and they'll make sure that nothing's running in the background that would interact with you being able to, cheat on the exam. I don't know. So anyway, you want to, they will check your system out. Make sure your laptop is plugged in. Don't trust your battery. You're going to be 2 hours taking the exam. You do have to have an ID or photo ID. Your desk has to be completely clean. There can be absolutely nothing on your desk. You cannot take a bathroom break. You got to plan all this before you actually sit for the exam, right? You can go to the page and do a system check also. Scheduling the exam is up here. Somewhere here. Gotta be it's a hyperlink, I'm sure. Yeah, click here. Okay, so there is a schedule the exam. Okay, so you come in here, putting the link in the chat for you, and online proctored. Okay, so you can come in here and have your system tested to make sure that everything, all the details are here. Windows system, and your guide is here as well. So I urge you to go through this, make sure your system, and I'm sure most everyone's system is going to be able to handle all of this. But then we would want to go to Web Assessor. Now they're about to change this, but for right now, we will use the Web Assessor. So we'll go in and register for the exam. So I encourage you to do this today. Okay, I encourage you to, well, as soon as you can, let's put it that way, is go ahead and get registered for the exam. If you do not have a Web Assessor account, come in here and create a new Web Assessor account. Okay. And once you do, go ahead and create username and password, get logged in. And once you are in here, you can do the schedule an exam. Okay. And go in and choose the exam for the, oh, I went to how to set, sorry. I want to actually schedule an exam. Register for an exam. Here we go. Register for the exam. I took you to the wrong place. And then we'll go to the MCD1 location here. And once it comes up, developer exams. And there are several here that are Salesforce developer, JavaScript, etc., certified platform. Make sure you come down here to the one that says MuleSoft developer. Okay, it is called Salesforce certified MuleSoft developer. It does have the word Salesforce in it. Okay, so this is the guy you want right there. All right, once you're in there, click open. And then there is your exam there. So you will do, if you're going to, it seems like you can go to on-site to do this. I thought at one point they were not doing on-site anymore. I don't know, but obviously it does have it listed. So the retake policy is you can retake this exam 2 times, 24 hours apart. Okay, there is some criteria here about it, but go ahead and click on, oh, come on, open. Why is it not letting us go in and do the actual exam? So this is the one we want. Can you guys click yours? Does yours let you click yours? Oh, I see why I can't. It says you already hold this certification. See how it's not letting me? Do you guys, is anyone in this right now?
No, I'm trying to make my way there. I did set up a WebAssessor account. You told us to on day one, so I'm logged in.
Okay, here's what it's going to look like. Because I hold these exams, it's not letting me. See it? But here's what yours should look like. You should have a big register button. So this is what it looks like if you already have them. And then, of course, I'm just using this as an example, but you would go ahead and click on the register for that given exam. Okay. And then from there, where did it just take me? There we go. Then it'll take you to a register for choose your date. Okay. And I'm not going to take a Slack exam. That's the one I chose because I don't have it. But then you would, well, and what you can look at here are dates that the exam is available. Select time zone. Okay, so select our time zone. And then you'll see, okay, so you'll do the time zone and then you're going to see availability. Okay. So if I click on the availability for certain dates, you're going to see the time slots. And you can go ahead and choose your time. And then I acknowledge and select, and I'm not going to go forward. There's probably a payment somewhere. I'm not going to go forward because I don't want to take a Slack exam.
I'm looking. Yeah, no, don't do. I'm looking at the MCD one now. I got there and it's showing me the calendar and seeing that pretty much any day is available.
Okay. Yeah. That's great. So yeah, I encourage both of you, really where you sit right now, to go ahead and set the date, you know, not too far in the future. Go ahead and, because you know what's going to happen when you set the date, it becomes real. You know, you're studying, you're doing all this, but go ahead and get a date set. And that way, go for it. Just go for it. All right. We've got a few other things to cover. And of course, there are some videos out there for you to review as well. Exam strategy, how to, you know, make sure you get to the end of the exam. You know, you've got 2 minutes for each question. Don't take too long on a given question. If it's really long, do the best you can in a shorter amount of time. Click it that you're going to come back and review it and go to the next one, because there's going to be shorter questions that are faster. So don't labor over a question too long. And also know this, if there are some questions that are just like not even relevant to what the material, you know, what your objectives are, it's like maybe an architect question or something off the wall, it's probably one of the questions that are not graded, because they do that. And it'll even tell you right before you start taking the exam, but there's going to be some questions that are not graded. So be aware of that. Okay. What they're doing is testing questions or checking to, I don't know what they're up to. I had one that I'm like, what are they? You know, it was like totally in another topic altogether. And it was one of those. So just know that they do that. Not to be mean, but just to know, you know, go with your gut. Go with your gut feeling. If it's a question where there's more than one answer, remember what I shared with you all before. If it's a select two, then be sure you select two. Because if you only select one and it's right, you are going to get the whole question wrong. Okay. So don't fall, oops, that's not the right one. Don't fall into that trap. Let me get to the developer. And here is the PDF version of the exam, of the practice exam. Okay. And so let me see if I can find like if I came across something that was really long like this, look at the exhibit, figure out what's going on. And so I started looking through all this. I would go, okay, where are the similarities? Where are some things similar? Like notice that the headers are the same. Okay, but what's different is the request. So I would start drawing, so the header's the same here. This one doesn't have a header. Okay, does that matter? Do we need to have the auth header? So you start analyzing, if it's something really like this, it's a longer question, analyze it and give it your best answer. But don't sit here and really try to go over and over and over and over. It's one question. Go to the next one, because guess what? It might be something very simple. Okay. It might be something that you're going to go, oh my gosh, okay, I'm done with that. What's the next one? Give me the next one. Here we go. Okay. So look through these and be comfortable or familiar with how the questions are worded. Let me find another one that's a good complex one. That one's a good one to look at, but a lot of this is syntax, data weave syntax here. Let me get out of this category here and go to a scenario. Most of the, okay, here's one that has a couple different things here. All right, so what I recommend to do when I'm looking at a question that's a little more complex is I start here. I start with the question that's right above the answers. Why? Because this is what I need to look for. What is the minimum number of global elements? That's what I'm looking for. Now I'll go back and read the top, and then I'll come down here and see what they've got for me here. But I target this question right here. I go there first. What are they wanting? What are they asking for? Okay. So that's my strategy. Again, what values are accessible in the child flow? All of this stuff is great, but don't cloud your head with that. Figure out what they want to know first. Then come back here and then come down below. Okay. Let me find another. Same thing. Sometimes there's stuff in here. I don't know how this exam, I've really not read a lot of the questions on the exam for this one at all. When it comes to really seeing what they've got in there, it's been a while. But what I'm getting at is sometimes there is information in this part just to throw you off a little bit. See what they want here. See what they want here. And trying to look for a multiple, like choose two. They are in the exam. The choose two are in the choose two or three. So just make sure that you do that. Watch for it. Okay. Here's another one. What payload is then returned to the client app from the Mule app? Okay. So this is really what they're after. Then you read in the rest, then you start studying and going from here. And then what you'll do if you have questions that you're marking for review, that you'll review those later, you'll it will not let you submit your exam until all of your flagged for review have been removed. Okay. So make sure that you go back and review the ones and then unselect them before you submit the exam. And you'll get an answer right then. It's going to tell you, that you passed and celebrate. It's going to tell you if you didn't make it. It'll give you a report, and you can look at your report and see the areas that you need to strengthen. So don't feel like if you don't pass the first time that's it. Look at it as your first experience of taking a MuleSoft exam, and you also are seeing what the exam's like. Take that pressure off. Don't look at it like, oh my gosh, I got to pass or fail. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Take that pressure off and just approach it that I want to see what this exam is like. I'm here to scope out the exam. Okay. And go through it. Like I said, just watch your time. On the exam itself, it's going to have a timer. So I always keep an eye at the top on the timer. I look at what question I'm on. Okay, I'm on question 34. And so that's 68 minutes. How am I doing on my time? Okay, you might get done sooner than the 120 minutes that you have. But gauge the number of question you're on based on how much time you have left, and make the worst thing that can happen is you don't have enough time to finish every question, or at least provide an answer for every question. Because chances are on those last few questions, they're easier questions. They may be an easy answer. So make sure you get all the way to question number 60 and then come back and check on those questionable ones that you need a little more time to go over. Because chances are you're going to have time. Okay. So be sure to do that. And then you'll do the submission. Then they're going to ask you questions going into the exam that are not part of the exam. And like, how long have you been in IT or things like that? There's some weird little questions. It's just demographic questions that they're going to ask you. And then the exam will officially start, you know, and they will be watching you the entire time you're taking the exam. They might interrupt you and, you know, ask you a question, or, you know, if you look around a lot, they may ask you, you know, hey, what's going on? Or you can't talk. You can't read the questions out loud. I can't go, a database table contains, you know, you can't read the questions out loud. You can't do any of that. They will not go for that. If you have technical difficulties and your internet goes down, they will probably reschedule you. And that's okay. Don't stress over it. Okay. So I have seen that happen with other students. It's never happened in my case, but they have interrupted me while taking the exam, and it does mess you up. I'll give you that. That's why I want you to know what it could be like as you go into it. You know, because I was going along taking an exam and they paused me, and I think it was, I don't know if it was my internet or there was something going on, but they paused me, and so I was like, I had to get back in the groove of like, they stop the clock when they interrupt you, most cases. But they will, you know, talk to you, and sometimes they will tell you that they're going to call you on your cell phone or something like that. But that, I've not had that one myself, but I've heard other people say that they'll do that sometimes. You cannot answer your phone, but they will pop up. There's going to be a little message on your screen that has, you know, like a chat box. And so you can communicate, and they'll say, hey, I'm going to call you on your phone. And that way you'll know it's them. Okay. All right. Any questions?
Very good. I like hearing a lot of stuff about it beforehand. That's helpful.
Okay, good, good. Yeah. All right. So we're going to wrap. I'm going to go ahead and pause it here. So what officially this is going to conclude our planned sessions. I'm going to do a couple other recordings, and we have some other recordings for a few of the other objectives that I mentioned that I don't think we dove too deep on, like transport boundary. There's a hello world recording I already have for a Mule application, and it'll talk more about the transport boundary there that I'll share with everyone. It'll be in the same series, and MUnit as well. Okay, so we have for each, and parallel for each is captured in another video. The policies and tiers, the life cycle of an API captured in another video. I'll put all of those in this series as well. And then MUnit. So it's official. Have you got an idea of the dates that you're going to choose?
No clue. Do you want to stop recording?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.
I don't know. I've looked at this calendar. I mean,